This is Wretched Radio with Todd Friel.
Welcome to a third world order. This is Wretched Radio. Sociologist Philip Reif, not a Christian, Jewish by heritage. How much he practiced, don't know. He wrote extensively on Sigmund Freud. He also was a cultural critic, taking a look at history. How did cultures operate sociologically? Why did they behave the way that they did? Why do we behave the way that we do? Written, give or take, around 2000. It is a book released posthumously called Sacred Order, Social Order. And he breaks cultures into three world orders, three different types of societies. The first world, not rich and lavish lifestyles, first world, people who believed in myths. So think, for instance, pagans, people who followed Greek philosophy. They loved the Iliad. They loved myths, epic stories. But even though their beliefs were not correct, they at least had a sense that there is something out there bigger to whom I'm going to be held accountable, and that kept culture in order. If you've ever read through the book of Acts, it's fascinating to me. It's right around chapter 22 and 23. Paul having to give a defense of himself. The Jews are wanting to kill him. They take an oath that we're not going to eat until we kill him. And yet, because of Paul's Roman citizenship, his nephew, going to the man in authority who was going to be hearing his accusers, said, whoa, this guy's a Roman. And he amassed huge amount of troops to march Paul out to keep him safe because he's a Roman citizen. And I remember reading that and going, why would he do that? I mean, he doesn't have a Christian value system. Why a sense of justice? Well, these ideas that there is somebody to whom we are accountable, I think was one of the social glues that held a society together and kept it from going completely bonkers. And I think that's why our current culture isn't completely just unraveled, because there are still enough people who believe in a higher being, whatever it happens to be. But as that recedes, then culture has nothing to tether itself to but itself. And that is why Philip Reif says the second world order, which is what we've experienced in America for the last several hundred years, it's based on faith, not fate like the first world, but faith. That is the culture of Western civilization as you and I know it. However, because of forces, people talking, ideas, academia, philosophers have been introducing steadily more of a humanistic worldview, a dismissal of the divine. There is no God. We will decide everything. And that is a third world culture, according to Philip Reif. Let's get to the Carl Trueman review of his book, Sacred Order, Social Order. Philip Reif. Why is so much traumatic cultural change occurring with such rapidity? Hey, I use that word. And intensity today. We can helpfully apply this scheme to our current context of first, second, and third world orders. The proliferation of identities and the consequent chaotic militancy of identity politics is inextricably related to the collapse of the sacred, to the demolition of any transcendent metaphysical basis on which a coherent social order might be founded. You and I know that. Every man did that which is right in their own eyes. We see an example of a third world in the book of Judges. We see it regularly, frankly, in Israel. They stop believing in God, or they worship something on a hill someplace, and the culture would devolve until God would disperse them, bring them back, set up a king, have a ruler, have somebody to control it. But every time religion receded, chaos increased. Bingo. It's what we're seeing today. Philip Reif notes that third worlds, non-religious cultures, are marked by scorn for the moral codes on which second worlds are based. Now, I don't think that he saw that scorn before he died in 2006, but we see it today, don't we? We see scorn toward Christians. Oh, how dare that. I've got a stack of stories filled with scorn for Christians. I'm thinking that Christians, that we don't let our little children determine their own gender. How can you be so wicked? It's morality flipped on its head. Back to Philip Reef, they turn those into matters of scorn, and vice comes to be regarded as virtue. Anybody? Isaiah 5. Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who say up is down, black is a camera. Nothing equals anything. It's complete chaos. That's third world living. And that is the force that we are being greeted with every morning when we wake up. They turn faith matters into scorn, and vice comes to be regarded as virtue, a message pressed with vigor by third world cultural elites whose dominant attitude of any semblance of a sacred order is one of mockery, cynicism, and irony. I even hear that sometimes in supposed evangelical circles. Oh, you believe in creation. Oh, you believe that the world is only 6,000 or 7,000 years old. Perhaps the Rolling Stones capture the third world cultural mood best. Quote, now that every cop is a criminal and all the sinners saints. Isn't that what we're talking about here? The law enforcement people, bad. Sinners are now put up on a pedestal. Brave, courageous, progressive, on the right side of history. By the way, the name of that song comes from Sympathy for the Devil by the Rolling Stones. What is the increasingly thin foundation on which today's sexual codes are built? Mere consent. That's what Barbra Streisand was alluding to. Hey, they said they were thrilled to be there. In other words, they gave him permission. They gave consent to Michael Jackson to molest them. Who are you to judge? And that is why the push for pedophilia is growing. A little child can give consent. It doesn't have to be in the closet anymore, as long as there is consent, which is interesting, because that definition that is created by the world has caused a great deal of problems on university campuses and society in general. When boys and girls are out at a party, there's drinking, some other stuff potentially going on, and suddenly things get a bit out of control. And now we have to protect women from louts and their behavior. How do you do that? Well, you start defining consent. Consent needs to look like this. Maybe it needs to be in writing. Apparently, there needs to be a form in triplicate. There's the consent that was given. I don't know if blood level needs to be examined to see if any alcohol was in their blood when they signed the document. But they're struggling with consent. Here's the Christian definition. Get married. There's your consent. Now, obviously, not to molest one's own spouse, but that's saying, yes, I wish to join with you in a one-flesh union under the covenant of marriage between a man and a woman. There's your consent. It worked out pretty well when we were a second world country. Now we are third world, and mere consent is all that is needed for any behavior at all. It is not the intrinsic nature of the individual sexual act that renders it unacceptable today. Rather, it's whether those involved are willing participants. That's all. Negotiating personal desire, not objective moral judgments, is the ethical order of the day. Bingo. If you believed that there were still prophets predicting the future, you'd say Philip Reef was one. The book, Sacred Order, Social Order, capturing, before it really has accelerated to this speed, predicting what was going to happen. Third worlds, inevitably, now this is studying history, no God, nothing transcendent. Third worlds inevitably tend toward individual personal hedonism. That means that the purpose of sex will be transformed and the taboos surrounding it abolished. Abortion, emblematic of that. sex doesn't have a higher ideal, not for the purpose of reproduction. Abortion is just removing evidence of past sexual activity. All that's significant in the act of intercourse is just the passing pleasure. That's it. And so, of course, you'd want to abort that. I'm just having a good time. That's what hedonism does. It undermines the prohibitions on incest, homosexuality, and any other kind of sexual coupling one cares to imagine. It furthers the idea that such taboos are arbitrary at best and thus ripe for abolition. Our current culture is anti-culture. Why? Because Nietzsche's madman was correct. If you unchain the earth from the sun, you end up plunging into total darkness. It's getting dim out there, isn't it? This is Wretched Radio.